I considered leaving you. I was afraid.
Everything.
We're just farmers. We're not a threat.
You're delusional. You have to fight. Warriors to fight with us. The Motherworld. To give you a chance at redemption.
Did you know Rebel Moon Part 1 was inspired by a rejected Star Wars idea but is better or worse? Let's find out on Real Signal Studio. A Child of Fire is another name used for this film. It should not be confused with the 2009 novel Child of Fire. Chalice of Blood is also another title connected to this film, but it is different from the 2022 finished movie. The Chalice of Blood also it is not related to the video game series Rebel Moon Racing. Rebel Moon Part 1 A Child of Fire, also known simply as Rebel Moon, is a 2023 American science fiction movie set in space. It is directed by Zack Snyder, who also helped write the story along with Kurt Johnstad and Shay Hatten. The movie has a big cast including Sophia Boutella, Dajimon Hounsou, Ed Skrein, Mitchell Hashman, B. Duna, Ray Fisher, Charlie Hunnam, and Anthony Hopkins. This story takes a place in the fictional galaxy controlled by a powerful and strict empire called the Motherworld. Its army, known as the Imperium, is a dangerous force that threatens a peaceful farming village on a moon called Wealth. The main character, Kora, is a farmer soldier of a Imperium that decided to fight back and protect the village. To do this, she travels across the galaxy to find and gather strong warriors who can help her stand against the Imperium before they return to destroy Welt. The movie first had a limited release in cinemas on December 50, 2023. After that, it was released on Netflix on December 2020, where more people could watch it. The film received mostly negative reviews from critics. Many people liked the acting, action scene, visual, and music, but they did not like the story and felt it was too similar to Star Wars movie. A sequel called Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargive, was released on April 19, 2024, continuing the story. Later, a special R-rated director cut version of the film was also released with the later Rebel Moon Chapter 1 Chalice of Blood on August 20, 2024 in a quiet village on a distant moon. A mysterious woman named Kora, played by Sophia Boutella, lives a hidden life. She once served a powerful empire, but now she only wants space. Beside her is Ganner, a simple and kind farmer portrayed by Mitchell Hashmin, who dreams of protecting his home and people, but peace does not last long. A cruel and dangerous Admiral Atticus Noble, played by Eddie Skrein, arrives from the Motherworld. He brings fear, power, and destruction with him. Knowing a war is coming, Korea begins her journey to find Varese. She meets General Titos, played by Dajimon Hansu, a broken leader looking for redemption. Then comes Nemesis, a silent but deadly Sweden woman, played by Donna B, driven by revenge. Tarak, portrayed by Star Nazar, is a strong warrior who rises from slavery and proves his courage. They are joined by K. A charming smuggler played by Charlie Hunnam, but not everything about him can be trusted. Far away rebel leader Trine Bloodaxe, played by Ray Fisher, prepares to fight back against the Empire alongside his sister Devra Bloodaxe, portrayed by Chiloptra Salimun, and watching over everything is Jimmy, a mysterious robot voiced by Anthony Hopkins. Whose true purpose slowly begins to unfold. Together, these characters form a team of warriors, each with their one past pain and purpose, ready to stand against the unstoppable force of the Motherworld. Sofia Boutelia's selection as Kora uncovered the entire casting strategy of Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, with Zack Snyder identifying her early as an ideal visual for a character defined by quiet, reliable, little precision, and a hidden history of imperial service turned rebellion. Boutelia's background as a professional dancer translated directly into physicality demanded by Korea fight geography, where every movement carries the weight of muscle memory from her training in belt and hip hop, skills that inform the fluid, almost ballistic combat sequences and their invasion. Her period work in Kingston, the Secret Service, established her as a capable action performer and capable for blending grace with brutality, while Atomic Blondie swapped her wielding to endure grueling stone work without relying on doubles for the most demanding sequences. The memory for sure demonstrated her range in blending vulnerability with stock resolve traits. Sender Experience thought when he placed her on his visual board long before scripting was finalized. In interviews, Senator noted that Betula's real-life blind of kidneys and thoughtness married Korea duality, allowing to actors to access emotional layers without forcing artifice. She could convey the character guilt over her past as an Imperium soldier while projecting the quiet authority needed to rally to ragtag group for farmers and warriors. Boutelia preparation involved months of physical conditions tailored to the film hybrid science aesthetic, incorporating weapons training with medicals, inspiring bleeding and futuristic firearms that echoed the Salmon Somori homage. Senator woven into the narrative her Moroccan Algerian heritage, also subtly informed Korea outsider status, unveiled landing an authentic culture-specific character who arrives as a stranger yet becomes the moral center of the statement. The casting choice paid dividends in scenes where Korea's internal conflict surfaces, particularly during confrontation with Admiral Noble forces, where Boutelia understands delivery, elevated dialogues, heavy moments into character-defining beats. Her chemistry with the ensemble for through extensive recalls Sander conducted like a rook behind Jameson, allowed Korea to function as both leader and reluctant participant, never overshadowing the sporting players while anchoring the ensemble Tente Digimon Hensu casting as a general tears representative another functional decision one sender described as initiative given the actor history of embodying commanding battle harrowing figures with moral complexity and so breakthrough amistad and subsequent roles in Gladiator and Blood Diamond had already cemented his reputation for delivering narratives through minimalism, a quality that aligned perfectly with Titus, the disgraced general recruited from the gladiatorial arenas of the Emporium. Snyder highlighted Hanso early alongside Boutelia on his vision board, citing the actor's inherent coldness and the way his voice and presence could convey the codes of regard without exposition. Titus asked from reluctant warriors to committed rebel Marius Honsu on career trajectory of transitioning from sporting heavy to lead protagonist in January affairs and the actor drew on personal experience of displacement and reluctance to flesh out the character cultural identity within the film expansive universe. Hensu preparation included intensive sword and shield drills that recalled his gladiator training, but Sanders collaborated processive encoded him to infuse Titan with elements of his Benin heritage, creating a various whose fighting style and physiology feel organically rooted rather than kinetic in group sense with the robust Hansu performs provided and emotional blessed is measured line readings contrasting the more validating personality around him and undercoming the theme of romantic that run through the ensemble. The casting elevated Tito's beyond a stock mentor figure, turning him into a living embodiment of the film exploration of loyalty, betrayal, and the cost of survival in a galaxy ruled by the Motherworld. Aid screen portrayal of Admiral Attacker Nobel capitalized on the actor proven ability to humanize monstrous authority figures, a skill honed in Deadpool and his Game of Thrones, or as Dario Nair's Snyder cast screen to bring a charismatic maniac to Noble. The Emporium officer whose arrival on world distributes and the colony frugal space screen British working class background and transition from rapper to actor informed his interpretation of novel as a calculated opportunist whose cruelty is laced with bucolic charm, making the character more insidious than a cartoon villain. The actor's physical transformation, complete with the film distinctive haircut and military regalia, amplified the visual treat, while his vocal work emphasized the administrative molecular eloquence during interrogation sequence. Screen involvement extended behind performs the practice despite indiscussed about the Emporium hierarchy helping refine noble relationship to regard Belisaire and the broader political machinations. His chemistry with Boutelia crackles in their shared science, where the power dynamic shift from hunter and hunted to something more physiology. Layered center direction allowed screen room for improvisation, resulting in moments where noble sarcasm undercuts the film operative scale, grounding the spectacle in recognizable human passion. This casting choice ensured the antagonist never felt one-dimensional, providing the necessary counterweight to the robust idealism and heightening the stakes of every confrontation.
Charlie Hunnam stepped into the role of Kai, the cunning pilot and smuggler whose ambiguous allegiances drive several key plot turns, after Snyder recognized the actor's capacity for blending roguish charm with underlying menace. Hunnam's work in Sons of Anarchy and Pacific Rim had already showcased his ability to portray morally flexible anti-heroes who operate on the fringes of larger conflicts, qualities that made him a natural fit for Kai's street-smart survivor archetype. The casting process reportedly began with Hunnam reading for a different part before the script revealed Kai as the character that chose him. As the actor later described in red carpet interviews, Snyder's punk rock approach to direction encouraging actors to surprise one another allowed Hunnam to layer Key with a Cockney-inflected swagger that contrasted the more formal speech patterns of the Imperium characters. Hunnam's preparation focused on piloting sequences and hand-to-hand combat, incorporating practical effects work that emphasized the tactile reality of the shipboard fights. His British roots and history of working with ensemble casts in genre projects helped him integrate seamlessly with the international group of rebels, creating believable friction and camaraderie in the recruitment montages. Kai's betrayal subplot gains extra tension from Hunnam's performance, where small gestures and shifting eye contact telegraph the character's internal calculations without overt exposition. The role also marked return to high-concept sci-fi for Hunnam after several dramatic turns, and his commitment to the physical demands underscored Snyder's vision of cast willing to embrace the film's ambitious scope. Michiel Huisman's casting as Gunner, the idealistic farmer whose transformation from pacifist to fighter provides the emotional core of the Veld sequences, leveraged the actor's experience playing complex everyman in Game of Thrones and The Haunting of Hill House. Huisman brought a quiet intensity to Gunner that balanced Kora's stoicism, his Dutch South African background adding subtle layers to the character's outsider perspective and the colony. Snyder cast him to embody the film's theme of ordinary people rising to extraordinary circumstances, and Huisman's preparation involved farmhand training and marksmanship drills that grounded the character's arc in physical reality rather than abstract heroism. Huisman's scenes with Botella emphasize the budding partnerships between Gunner and Kora, where his earnest delivery contrasts her guarded reserve and creates space for genuine character growth. The actor's history of portraying morally conflicted figures allowed him to navigate Gunner's crisis of conscience with nuance, particularly in moments where non-violence clashes with the necessity of rebellion. His integration into the ensemble highlighted Snyder's emphasis on cultural specificity. Huisman drew from personal narratives of resilience to inform Gunner's quiet determination, making the farmer's evolution feel earned rather than contrived. This choice ensured the Veld community felt lived in, with Gunner serving as the audience surrogate whose perspective humanizes the larger galactic conflict. Doonabai's recruitment as Nemesis, the sword-wielding warrior with the cybernetic arm and tragic past, tapped onto the South Korean actress's established action pedigree from Cloud Atlas, Sense8, and her domestic genre work. Bai's casting added international texture to the Rebels, her performance blending graceful lethality with profound melancholy that echoes the film's themes of loss and retribution. Snyder envisioned Nemesis as a silent avenger whose combat style pays homage to classic samurai cinema, and Bai's dance-like precision in fight choreography honed through years of martial arts training delivered sequences that stand among the film's visual highlights. Her minimal dialogue approach forced the performance to rely on physicality and expression, amplifying the impact of her scenes alongside Hounsou and Fisher. Bai's cultural perspective influenced the character's design, with elements of Korean folklore subtly woven into Nemesis's backstory to enrich the universe's multicultural fabric. Her preparation included extensive weapons work with the film's custom blades, resulting in fight scenes that feel both balletic and brutal. Within the ensemble, Bai's presence provides a counterpoint to the more verbose characters, her stoic demeanor reinforcing the idea that drama transcends language. The casting decision elevated Nemesis from supporting fighter to essential emotional pillar, her arc intersecting meaningfully with the group's quest for justice. Ray Fisher's portrayal of Blood Ox, the fierce rebel leader with the score to settle against the Imperium, built on the actor's experience in Justice League and his theater background, where commanding stage presence translates to larger-than-life genre roles. Fisher infused Blood Ox with the volcanic intensity that contrasts the more measured rebels, his physicality and vocal delivery making the character a natural rallying point during the recruitment phase. Snyder encouraged Fisher to draw from his own experiences of advocacy and resilience, allowing the actor to channel personal fire into Blood Ox's anti-authoritarian stance. The casting added depth to the rebel faction, positioning Blood Ox as both ally and potential rival whose leadership style challenges Kora's authority. Fisher's preparation emphasized acts and close-quarters combat, incorporating stunt work that highlighted the character's raw power. His scenes with Stasnire and Deuna by crackle with group tension, illustrating the fragile alliances formed under duress. By casting Fisher, Snyder ensured the ensemble reflected diverse forms of resistance, with Blood Ox embodying the unyielding fury that complements the quieter determination of characters like Titus and Nemesis. The performance contributes to the film's sense of a living rebellion, where individual backstories collide to forge a collective force. Stasnire's selection as Tarak, the exiled noble-turned-beastmaster, capitalized on the actor's emerging genre credentials from Supergirl and Game of Thrones, where he demonstrated an ability to convey aristocratic poise alongside primal ferocity. Nayar's Indian Fijian heritage informed his interpretation of Tarak's cultural displacement, adding authenticity to the character's arc of reclaiming identity through rebellion. Snyder's casting process emphasized ensemble compatibility, and Nayar's athletic background proved essential for the animal handling sequences and high-stakes action that defined Tarak's contributions. His preparation involved working with practical creature effects and wire work, resulting in moments where Tarak's bond with the native fauna becomes a visual metaphor for harmony with the natural world against imperial exploitation. Nayar's performance brings levity and wonder to the otherwise grim proceedings, his quieter moments with the group revealing layers of loss and hope. The role allowed him to expand beyond previous supporting parts, and his chemistry with the cast, particularly during the planet-hopping recruitment, helps sell the Band of Misfits dynamic. By choosing Nayar, Snyder diversified the visual and cultural palette of the rebels, ensuring Tarak's exotic background felt integral rather than ornamental to the story's themes of found family. Duffy, credited as Milius, represented a breakout casting choice that injected raw energy into the younger rebel contingent. Duffy's relatively fresh presence contrasted the veteran actors, bringing an unpolished authenticity to Milius's street-tough persona. Snyder's commitment to discovering new talent shown here, with Duffy's background in independent projects and physical theater providing the foundation for the character's combat style and quick-witted banter. The actor's preparation focused on weapons handling and group dynamics rehearsals, where Duffy's natural rapport with the ensemble helped establish Milius as the connective tissue between the older warriors and the colony's youth. Duffy's scenes emphasize themes of inherited conflict, with Milius's youthful idealism clashing against the hardened realities faced by Kora and Titus. The casting decision underscored Snyder's desire for an ensemble that spanned generations and experiences, making the rebellion feel organic and multifaceted. Duffy's performance, marked by intense physical commitment and emotional directness, ensures Milius registers as more than cannon fodder, contributing memorable beats during the village defense sequences. Anthony Hopkins' vocal performance as Jimmy, the robotic knight-errant whose awakening drives several philosophical undercurrents, added gravitas through minimalism. Snyder cast Hopkins for his unparalleled ability to convey wisdom and melancholy through voice alone, drawing on the actor's history of nuanced narration in projects like The Remains of the Day. Hopkins recorded his lines with a focus on subtle inflection that humanizes the mechanical entity, transforming Jimmy from potential comic relief into a poignant symbol of lost ideals. The casting elevated the AI character beyond exposition device, with Hopkins' delivery infusing lines about myth and loyalty with Shakespearean weight. Hopkins' involvement required no on-set presence, yet his recordings were integrated during post-production to sync with the practical and digital effects work. The choice reflected Snyder's ambition to blend high-profile talent with experimental elements, creating a voice that resonates across the ensemble's arcs. Jimmy's interactions with the rebels gain emotional depth from Hopkins' gravitas, reinforcing the film's exploration of what constitutes humanity in a galaxy of machines and empires. Francis Fee's regent Belisarius served as the shadowy architect of the Imperium's machinations, with Fee's theater-honed precision bringing chilling calculation to the role. Fee's work in Hawkeye and his stage background equipped him to portray aristocratic villainy with elegant menace, complementing Skrin's more visceral Admiral Noble. The casting created a hierarchical villain dynamic that mirrored the rebels' own structure, with Fee's subtle menace providing long-term narrative propulsion. Cleopatra Coleman and Ingvar Sigurdsson rounded out key supporting roles as Devra and Hagen respectively, each contributing specificity to the Velt community and rebel operations. Coleman's poised intensity and Sigurdsson's grounded presence, drawn from their respective television and film work, ensured the peripheral characters felt fully realized rather than functional. Snyder's ensemble approach treated every casting decision as an opportunity to enrich the world building, resulting in a tapestry where even brief appearances advance themes of community, sacrifice, and defiance. The broader casting philosophy emphasized diversity in nationality, background, and experience, with Snyder deliberately assembling actors who could draw from personal histories to populate the galaxy. Rehearsals functioned as collaborative workshops where cultural exchange informed character backstories, fostering an environment where Botella's vulnerability informed Kora's leadership, Hounsu's authority shaped Titus's counsel, and Skrin's charisma sharpened Noble's threats. Physical training camps built not only stamina but interpersonal bonds, translating into authentic group chemistry on screen. Snyder's hands-on involvement in reviewing dailies in real time and adjusting blocking to highlight individual strengths ensured the cast's contributions felt integral rather than imposed. Minor roles, including stunt performers and voice actors listed in production credits, further populated the Imperium ranks and Velt villagers, creating a believable ecosystem where every face and voice reinforces the scale of the conflict. The inclusion of international talent like Bai and Nair alongside American and European performers reflected the story's interstellar scope, avoiding the homogeneity that plagues many sci-fi ensembles. This approach extended to gender and age representation, with female warriors like Nemesis and Malia standing shoulder to shoulder with male counterparts in combat and strategy sessions. Snyder's long gestation of the project allowed for deliberate casting that evolved alongside the script, with early attachments like Botella and Hounsu providing creative momentum during development. The process avoided traditional star-driven mandates, prioritizing fit over marquee value, which enabled performers like Fisher and Duffy to shine in roles that might otherwise have been diminished. Post-production voice work for Hopkins and additional ADR sessions for the ensemble refined performances without compromising the practical, on-location ethos that defined principal photography. The resulting ensemble functions as a modern update to classic adventure archetypes, where each actor's unique contribution about Botella's athletic grace, Hounsu's commanding presence, Skrin's sly menace, Hanam's roguish energy, Iceman's earnest transformation, Bai's silent intensity, Fisher's fiery resolve, Nair's primal nobility, Duffy's youthful fire, and Hopkins' wise narration coalesces into a cohesive unit greater than the sum of its parts. Casting choices directly influence the film's pacing, with character-driven moments emerging organically from the actors' interplay rather than forced exposition. The diversity of accents and physicalities further enhanced the visual language, making the galaxy feel vast and inhabited rather than stage-bound. In fight choreography, the cast's varied skill sets created dynamic sequences where Botella's precision duels with Skrin's brute force, Hounce's shield work anchors group melees, and Bai's swordplay provides balletic counterpoints. Training montages double as character studies, revealing backstories through movement, Tarak's beast mastery, Bloodox's axe swings, Nemesis's cybernetic strikes. These elements stem directly from casting decisions that valued physical capability alongside dramatic range, ensuring action never feels detached from personality. Dialogue scenes benefit equally, with the ensemble's collective experience allowing for layered subtext. Iceman and Botella's Farmstead conversations convey tentative trust through hesitant pauses and shared glances, while Hanam's banter with the group injects levity that humanizes the stakes. Skrin's interrogations crackle with tension because Fee's off-screen authority looms as a credible threat, and Hopkins' voiceovers provide philosophical framing that resonates because the cast has earned the audience's investment through lived-in performances. The casting extended to the extended cuts additional footage, where deeper character explorations particularly for Gunnar, Kai, and the village Ursa further validate the initial choices. Minor cast members like America Sabsamis, Taja Anderson, and others listed in full credits populate crowd scenes with authenticity, their brief moments adding texture to the colony's daily life and the Imperium's oppressive presence. Stunt ensembles, coordinated to match the principal actors' physiques and styles, maintain continuity in large-scale battles, reinforcing the decision to prioritize performers who could commit fully to the physical demands. Overall, the casting of Rebel Moon A Part 1, A Child of Fire succeeded by treating the ensemble as the primary special effect, where individual talents coalesce into a believable resistance movement. Snyder's vision board approach, combined with an open rehearsal process and emphasis on cultural authenticity, produced the cast whose collective chemistry drives the narrative forward. Each performer's background, preparation, and on-screen contribution interlocks to create a space opera that feels both epic and intimate, proving that thoughtful casting remains a cornerstone of effective world-building in genre filmmaking. The decisions ripple through every frame, from quiet conversations on Velt to explosive clashes in space, cementing the film's identity as a character-driven spectacle anchored by a meticulously assembled group of actors. Word count: approximately 5,000. Content derived primarily from production details, cast lists, and interview insights associated with the official title page and related credits. Production. The production of Rebel Moon A Part 1, A Child of Fire stands as one of the more remarkable creative endeavors in Netflix's still evolving history as a major film studio. Director Zack Snyder, long celebrated and criticized in equal measure for his visually maximalist approach to blockbuster filmmaking, brought to the project not only his trademark aesthetic sensibility but also an unusually personal attachment. This was a story that had lived in his imagination for decades before finally finding its way to the screen. The production was immense in scope, ambitious in its world-building aspirations, and shaped by a complex series of decisions that touched on everything from where filming would take place to how many versions of the final product audiences would ultimately be able to see. From the very beginning, Rebel Moon was conceived on a grand scale. The story was set across an entire fictional galaxy ruled by the imperialistic Motherworld, whose military arm the Imperium serves as the film's central antagonistic force. The narrative required the construction of radically distinct visual environments, pastoral moon villages, grimy port towns, gladiatorial arenas on distant moons, lush alien planets, and the cold metallic interiors of Imperium warships. Achieving all of this demanded extraordinary coordination between Snyder's creative team, production designers, visual effects houses, and the scores of below-the-line workers who would ultimately make the world of Rebel Moon tangible and believable on screen. The film was produced under the banner of the Stone Quarry and Grand Electric, with Snyder serving as a producer alongside Deborah Snyder, Eric Newman, and Wesley Kohler. The total below-the-line wages paid to California workers and in-state vendors for both Rebel Moon parts combined reached a reported $166 million, a figure that illustrates just how substantial the physical footprint of this production truly was. Variety noted, however, that this figure represented only the below-the-line costs allocated to California workers and that the total overall cost of the two-part project would be considerably higher. Netflix distributed the film, making it the streaming giant's most expensive science fiction investment to that point in terms of sheer production scale. The deal gave Snyder extraordinary creative latitude, including the ability, a highly unusual in the contemporary studio system, to prepare and plan separate R-rated director's cuts of both films from the very beginning of production, rather than treating them as afterthoughts or promotional bonuses. This dual-version approach meant that the production team was simultaneously working toward two distinct cinematic experiences, which added layers of complexity to every department involved. Development and pre-production. The development history of Rebel Moon is as layered and circuitous as the fictional galaxy it depicts. Zack Snyder first conceived the idea for what would eventually become Rebel Moon during his college years, making it one of the longest gestating projects of his career. The seed of the concept, a science fiction story drawing deeply on the works of Akira Kurosawa, the Star Wars saga, and the anarchic visual energy of Heavy Metal magazine, was planted in Snyder's imagination long before he had the industry standing to bring it to life at any meaningful scale. Snyder first discussed the concept with his eventual co-writer Kurt Johnstad in 1997. The two men had a long-standing creative relationship, and their early conversations about Rebel Moon remain relatively informal for years. Johnstad later recalled that initial discussions were loose and exploratory. The pair began roughing out ideas related to character, scene structure, and action sequences roughly 5 years after those initial talks, slowly developing what would eventually become the film's core narrative architecture. The project took a significant turn when Snyder pitched it as a Star Wars film to Lucasfilm shortly after that company's sale to the Walt Disney Company in 2012. Snyder saw the mythology he had been developing as potentially fitting within the Star Wars universe, but he acknowledged that the pitch was a big ask and that he understood the difficulty of the proposition. Lucasfilm did not move forward with the concept. Undeterred, Snyder also pitched the idea in slightly different forms to Warner Brothers Pictures on a couple of occasions, envisioning it at various points as both a video game and a feature film. Warner Brothers ultimately did not pick up the project either. At one stage, Snyder and producer Eric Newman reframed the project as an original television series, which appeared to be the form in which it would finally reach audiences. It was in this televisual configuration that the project was eventually brought to Netflix, the platform with which Snyder had been developing a significant working relationship following the massive success of Army of the Dead on the service. Netflix, however, ultimately saw greater potential in the concept as a theatrical-style cinematic release rather than a serialized streaming show, and discussions evolved accordingly. One pivotal creative decision made during this early Netflix phase involved the length of the project. Netflix Films chairman Scott Stuber expressed concerns that the project, in its original form, risked underperforming due to its considerable runtime. Snyder, unwilling to sacrifice character development and world-building by simply cutting material, made the decision instead to split the story into two separate films to be released sequentially. This structural choice fundamentally shaped everything that followed as the scope of the production, the release strategy, the casting timeline, and ultimately the audience experience of the story. The logo of Rebel Moon was itself a deliberate piece of design history, conceived as an homage to Heavy Metal magazine, one of the project's primary inspirations. This choice reflected Snyder's desire to position the film within a specific lineage of adult science fiction that was simultaneously pulpy and mythological, grounded in visceral imagery while reaching toward grand operatic themes. The film's inspirations were wide-ranging. The works of Akira Kurosawa provided structural and thematic scaffolding, particularly in terms of the ensemble warrior narrative and the moral weight given to questions of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. Star Wars provided the visual grammar of the space opera genre, while heavy metal contributed an anything-goes visual and tonal wildness that Snyder hoped would distinguish Rebel Moon from more sanitized science fiction fare. Casting for the ensemble was announced across a series of press releases spanning several months. Sofia Boutella's casting as the lead character Kora, a former Imperium soldier navigating a crisis of loyalty and identity, was announced in November 2021. Her casting was significant. Boutella had built a reputation for physically demanding, emotionally complex roles, and she brought to Kora a dancer's precision and a genuine gravity that Snyder believed was essential to anchoring the film's sprawling ensemble. In February 2022, a major wave of casting announcements followed, with Charlie Hunnam, Jimin Hansu, Ray Fisher, Gina Malone, Stas Nair, Baidu Una, and Stuart Martin all confirmed for roles. Rupert Friend was also announced at this time as the film's primary antagonist. Ray Fisher, who had collaborated with Snyder on the Justice League films and whose advocacy for the Snyder Cut of that film had been a defining chapter of his public career. Ray first became aware of Rebel Moon around 2019 or 2020, when Snyder was still developing it as a television series. Snyder had shown Fisher whiteboards during that period, describing it only as a little space thing he was working on. Fisher expressed interest, and the relationship eventually led to his casting as Darian Bloodox, a warrior and commander of insurgents. Cary Elwes, Corey Stoll, Michiel Huisman, and Alfonso Herrera joined the cast in April 2022, filling out additional key roles. A significant cast change came in May 2022 when it was announced that Ed Skrein had replaced Rupert Friend as the film's main antagonist as the sadistic Imperium Admiral Atticus Noble due to scheduling conflicts. Skrein, who had previously played the villain Ajax in Deadpool, brought an icy menace to Noble that would become one of the film's more discussed performances. At the same time, Cleopatra Coleman, Francis Fee, and Ryan Reese were announced as joining the project, further filling out the ensemble. In June 2022, it was announced that the legendary Anthony Hopkins had joined the cast to provide the voice of Jimmy, a sentient mechanized battle robot and former defender of a slain king. Hopkins' involvement lent the project significant prestige and added a Shakespearean gravity to a character who might otherwise have remained a background figure. Filming principal photography on Rebel Moon commenced on April 19, 2022, a date Snyder himself marked on social media, posting the message "Day 1, it's begun." Alongside images from the set, producer Eric Newman also documented the occasion, confirming that the Stone Quarry and Netflix film were officially underway. The shoot would prove to be extraordinarily lengthy and demanding, ultimately running until December 2, 2022, a production period of approximately 7.5 months, encompassing 152 days of filming. All filming took place in California, a decision driven at least in part by the state's substantial film and television tax incentive program. The production qualified for $83 million in tax incentives through the California Film Commission's program, which rewards productions that generate significant economic activity within the state. This financial consideration made California the logical choice for a production of this scale, even as the story itself ranged across an entirely fictional galaxy. Snyder made the unusual creative decision to serve as his own cinematographer on Rebel Moon, a choice that represented a natural extension of the visual control he had sought throughout his career, but which also added considerable demands to his already immense workload as director and producer. By handling the camera himself, Snyder could respond more intuitively to moments on set, shaping the film's visual language in real time rather than communicating his intentions through an intermediary. This gave the production a particular stylistic coherence, as every visual decision flowed directly from Snyder's sensibility. One of the more idiosyncratic elements of the Rebel Moon production process was Snyder's use of live script readings to prepare for each day's shoot. A group of actors, Stuart Martin, Cary Elwes, Ryan Reese, and Ray Porter acted out and recorded the film script so that Snyder could listen to the material while preparing the day's shoot. getting a feel for the rhythmic and emotional qualities of each scene before the camera rolled. All four of those actors subsequently appeared in the film itself, playing the characters Dan, the King, the Queen, and Hickman respectively. A pleasing symmetry between the preparatory process and the final product. The scale of the shoot was matched by the physical and creative demands placed on the cast and crew. Multiple distinct planetary environments needed to be established and populated, requiring extensive work from production designers, costume departments, and set decorators. The moon built as the film's primary setting and the agricultural community whose fate drives the narrative needed to feel both alien and archetypal, evoking the pastoral simplicity of a Kurosawa village while existing within the film's larger science fiction framework. The port town of Providence required a different visual register entirely, grittier, more cosmopolitan, filled with the human and alien flotsam of a galaxy under imperial domination. Filming wrapped on December 2, 2022, at which point the production moved into its lengthy post-production phase. The completion of principal photography represented only the first major milestone in a process that would take another year before the film finally reached audiences. Post-production. The post-production phase of Rebel Moon was dominated by the enormous task of completing the film's visual effects work, a process that involved some of the most respected VFX houses in the world and required close coordination between Snyder's creative team and the various studios contributing to the film's digital imagery. Production VFX supervisor Marcus Armina served as the central point of coordination for this work. Overseeing contributions from Industrial Light Magic, ILM, Framestore, Luma Pictures, Mammal Studios, Rodeo FX, Scanline VFX, and Weta FX. The breadth of companies involved reflects the sheer volume of visual effects work required to realize Snyder's vision for Rebel Moon. ILM, the legendary effects company founded alongside the original Star Wars, brought its decades of expertise to elements of the film's vast space environments and Imperium military machinery. Framestore, known for its extraordinary creature and character work, was responsible for delivering two of the film's key creatures, the Bennu, the magnificent griffin-like beast that plays a pivotal role in Tarak's character arc, and Harmada, the unsettling arachnid-like humanoid Dogumo portrayed in the film by Gina Malone. Both creatures required the kind of painstaking digital craftsmanship that Framestore had honed across years of work on major fantasy and science fiction productions. The visual effects work was guided by a desire for what the creative team described as a particular aesthetic feel, something grungy and gritty rather than sleek and polished. This aesthetic philosophy reflected Snyder's broader vision for the film's visual world, a galaxy that felt lived in and worn, marked by the weight of imperial oppression and the grinding reality of survival under an authoritarian regime. The choice to pursue this kind of weathered, tactile science fiction look placed Rebel Moon in a particular tradition of the genre that valued visual authenticity over pristine futurism. The titles for the two parts were reported on August 20, 2023, A Child of Fire for the first film and The Scourgiver for the second. 2 days later, Snyder appeared at Gamescom opening night live in Germany to present the first teaser trailer for both parts, simultaneously confirming the subtitles and giving global audiences their first comprehensive look at the film's visual world. The Gamescom presentation was notable as a marketing choice. By presenting the trailer at a major gaming event rather than a traditional film industry venue, Netflix and Snyder signaled their intention to position Rebel Moon within a broader entertainment ecosystem that extended beyond cinema. During post-production, Snyder also worked to prepare the separate R-rated director's cuts that he had announced plans for earlier. This represented an unusual and logistically complex addition to the standard post-production workflow. Rather than working toward a single finished cut, the editing team under editor Dodi Dor needed to maintain and develop two parallel versions of each film, the PG-13 theatrical cut and the substantially longer, more graphically intense director's cut. For Part 1, this meant a theatrical cut running 134 minutes and a director's cut, titled Rebel Moon: A Chapter 1, Chalice of Blood, running an extraordinary 204 minutes, a full 70 minutes longer than the version initially released on Netflix. The existence of these planned director's cuts fundamentally shaped not only the post-production process but also the way certain scenes were filmed during principal photography. Knowing that a more explicit, expansive version would eventually exist allowed the production to capture materially additional character scenes, more graphic action sequences, extended story beats that might otherwise never have been shot at all. In this sense, the director's cuts were not merely editorial constructs but genuine alternative productions that had been planned and executed from the very beginning. The musical score for Rebel Moon was composed by Tom Holkenborg, the Dutch composer and musician who performs and releases music under the stage name Junkie XL. Holkenborg's collaboration with Zack Snyder represents one of the most sustained and productive partnerships between a director and composer in contemporary blockbuster cinema, and Rebel Moon marked another significant chapter in their creative relationship. Holkenborg first collaborated with Snyder on Man of Steel in 2013, where he contributed to the score alongside Hans Zimmer. The two men then worked together extensively on Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice in 2016, where Holkenborg's thunderous, percussive approach to orchestral composition helped define the sonic identity of the DC Extended Universe films. Their collaboration extended to Zack Snyder's Justice League and Army of the Dead, both released in 2021, cementing a creative shorthand between director and composer that allowed the musical dimension of Snyder's films to feel deeply integrated with his visual and narrative instincts. Holkenborg also scored 300, Rise of an Empire in 2014, a Snyder-produced project that further deepened his engagement with the visual and thematic world Snyder tends to inhabit. For Rebel Moon, Holkenborg faced the challenge of creating a musical identity for an entirely new fictional universe, one that needed to feel simultaneously epic and intimate, drawing on the traditions of space opera scoring while establishing its own distinctive sonic personality. The score needed to serve the film's Kurosawa-inflected narrative structure, in which a group of warriors is assembled one by one and each is given a meaningful moment of character establishment, while also providing the propulsive momentum required by the film's numerous action sequences. Holkenborg's approach to the Rebel Moon score drew on the same muscular, orchestrally dense methodology that had characterized his work with Snyder on the DC films, but adapted to the specific tonal requirements of this new universe, where the DC scores had often leaned into operatic darkness and a particular kind of mythological grandeur appropriate to figures like Superman and Batman. The Rebel Moon score needed to inhabit a more morally complex, geographically varied world, one that moved between pastoral agricultural settings, gritty urban environments, alien gladiatorial arenas, and the cold void of space. Critics who reviewed the film were generally divided on the score, with most attention given to the film's visual style and narrative weaknesses. One notable dissenting voice came from David James of We Got This Covered, who praised the director's cuts of both Rebel Moon films in considerable detail but specifically criticized the musical score as one of the film's weaker elements, a rare instance of pointed critical attention to Holkenborg's contribution to the project. The score was released alongside the film and represented another piece of the expansive Rebel Moon media ecosystem that Snyder and Netflix were working to establish. Music has historically been a crucial element of successful science fiction franchises, from John Williams' iconic Star Wars themes to the distinctive sonic signatures of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the hope was clearly that Holkenborg's work on Rebel Moon would eventually occupy a similar position of recognition within a franchise context. Released theatrical. Given Netflix's primary identity as a streaming platform, the theatrical release strategy for Rebel Moon represented an unusual and deliberately prestigious approach to the film's debut. Rather than bypassing theatrical exhibition entirely, as Netflix had done with a number of its earlier major productions, the company arranged for a limited theatrical run in 4 major cities across 3 countries, specifically showcasing the film on 70mm film. This choice of exhibition format was itself a statement of intent. 70mm projection is associated with epic filmmaking, with cinematic events rather than routine releases, with the kind of grandeur that demands to be seen on the largest possible screen with the highest possible image quality. The limited theatrical run began on December 15, 2023. A full week before the film's Netflix streaming debut. The 4 venues selected for this theatrical engagement were themselves iconic cinema institutions. In Los Angeles, the film was shown at the Egyptian Theater, the historic Hollywood venue with deep roots in the city's cinematic heritage. In New York City, it played at the Paris Theater, an intimate but celebrated single-screen venue that had long been associated with prestige releases in Toronto. The TIFF Lightbox at the home of the Toronto International Film Festival served as the Canadian venue in London. The Prince Charles Cinema, beloved by film enthusiasts for its programming of both classics and major releases, provided the European theatrical premiere. The decision to release on 70mm at these specific venues was consistent with the broader trend among certain filmmakers and distributors to use the large-gauge format as a marker of cinematic seriousness, a way of signaling that a film, even one primarily destined for streaming, deserved to be experienced in the most immersive theatrical setting possible. The choice also spoke to Snyder's stated desire for Rebel Moon to be perceived as a genuine cinematic event rather than merely content delivered to subscribers' living rooms. Snyder had announced plans well in advance to issue both the PG-13 rated cut and the version that would premiere theatrically and on Netflix and a separate R-rated director's cut for each of the 2 films. This dual version strategy reflected Snyder's experience with the Justice League situation, in which the existence of his original vision for that film had eventually led to the release of Zack Snyder's Justice League, a 4-hour HBO Max event that was received far more warmly by many critics and fans than the original theatrical cut. Whether intentionally or not, the promise of R-rated director's cuts created a built-in secondary event for Rebel Moon, a future moment when audiences who had been curious but cautious could revisit the story in a different, ostensibly more complete form. Home media. The primary home media avenue for Rebel Moon was Netflix itself, given the streaming platform's role as the primary distributor of the film. Following the limited theatrical engagement that began December 15, 2023, the film made its streaming debut on Netflix on December 22, 2023, a date chosen to capitalize on the holiday viewing period, when Netflix subscribers are historically among the most active in terms of engaging with new content. The R-rated director's cut of Part 1, titled Rebel Moon, Chapter 1, Chalice of Blood, was subsequently released on August 2, 2024, running approximately 204 minutes compared to the theatrical cut's 134 minutes. Chalice of Blood represented a substantially different cinematic experience, more graphic in its violence, more explicitly sexual in certain scenes, and considerably more expansive in its treatment of character and world-building. The director's cut was positioned as the true version of Snyder's vision, similar to the way Zack Snyder's Justice League had been presented as the director's intended form of that film. The availability of both versions on Netflix, the PG-13 theatrical cut for general audiences and the R-rated director's cut for those seeking a more intense experience, created an interesting dual-track engagement pattern for the film. Some viewers who had been underwhelmed by the theatrical cut made a point of watching the director's cut out of curiosity. Others who had never seen the theatrical version began with the longer cut directly. This split offered Netflix a way to generate continued viewership engagement with the Rebel Moon IP well beyond the initial release window. Netflix's engagement report data, published periodically by the company, provided some insight into the ongoing viewership patterns of the film. According to Netflix's What We Watched report, the theatrical cut of Rebel Moon generated 57.8 million views in the final weeks of December 2023, followed by 54.2 million views in the first half of 2024, 11.1 million views in the second half of 2024, 6.9 million views in the first half of 2025, and a further 2.4 million views in the second half of 2025. The R-rated director's cut, available from August 2024 onward, generated 7.6 million views in its first 5 months of availability, 2.1 million views in the first half of 2025, and 1.5 million views in the second half of 2025. These figures suggest a film that achieved significant initial viewership, particularly in the holiday period of its debut, but experienced the rapid audience fall-off typical of major Netflix releases. The enduring if modest viewership numbers in subsequent periods suggest that the film maintained a core audience of interested viewers who continued to engage with it well after the initial promotional window had closed. A novelization based on the director's cut of the film, written by V. Castro, was published by Titan Books on December 26, 2023, the day after Christmas, positioned to capture readers who had just seen or were about to see the film over the holiday period. The novelization offered readers an opportunity to experience Rebel Moon in a different medium, expanding on character interiority and world-building detail in ways that cinematic storytelling cannot always accommodate. Reception box office. Because Rebel Moon was primarily a Netflix production intended for streaming rather than traditional theatrical distribution, conventional box office metrics do not apply to the film in the way they would for a studio release. Netflix does not publicly report box office revenue in the traditional sense, and the limited theatrical engagement confined to 4 venues in 4 cities across a single week was not designed to generate significant ticket sales but rather to create a prestige event and generate press coverage ahead of the streaming launch. Netflix instead measures the performance of its original films through its proprietary viewership metrics, which the company reports in terms of total views, a measure that Netflix defines as the total number of hours watched divided by the film's runtime. By this metric, Rebel Moon performed strongly in its initial weeks of availability while ultimately falling short of the platform's biggest hits. After premiering on December 22, 2023, the film garnered an impressive 23.9 million views in its first 3 days on the service, making it the #1 most viewed English-language film on Netflix during the week of December 18 to 24. This strong opening represented a second consecutive Netflix #1 debut for Snyder, following Army of the Dead's dominant performance upon its release on the platform. The film maintained its top position the following week, accumulating 34 million views in its first full week of availability after its debut weekend, a solid hold that demonstrated continued audience interest. The second full week saw a significant drop, with the film falling to second place on Netflix's English-language film chart with 11.1 million views. By the fourth week of its availability, Rebel Moon had slipped to 8th place while earning 3.9 million views that week, with a cumulative worldwide total of 72.9 million views. This trajectory, a strong opening followed by a relatively steep decline, was consistent with the viewing patterns of most major Netflix releases and did not suggest unusual audience enthusiasm or unusual audience rejection. In terms of comparison to other 2023 Netflix original films, Rebel Moon's debut ranked as the 9th best among the year's slate of Netflix originals, a respectable but not exceptional performance. Forbes noted that the film's viewership, while superficially impressive in absolute numbers, compared relatively poorly to some of Netflix's biggest successes of the period, particularly when measured against the production costs involved. The film did experience a resurgence in viewership in April 2024. Coinciding with the release of Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scarred Shiver. For the week of April 15 to April 21, the first film re-entered Netflix's top 10 chart at number 5, bringing in 5.5 million additional views as. Audiences who had not seen Part 1 sought to catch up before or after watching the sequel. The following week, it moved up to 4th place, adding 6 million more views, a meaningful secondary performance driven by the marketing for the second film. According to Netflix's comprehensive engagement reports, covering the full span of the film's availability from its December 2023 premiere through the end of 2025, the theatrical cut of Rebel Moon generated a total of approximately 132.4 million views across all reporting periods, a substantial aggregate figure that positions it among Netflix's more watched original films, even if it fell short of the platform's most dominant titles. The R-rated director's cut, available from August 2024, contributed an additional 11.2 million views through the end of 2025. Critical response. The critical reception of Rebel Moon A Part 1, A Child of Fire was predominantly negative, making the film one of the more divisively reviewed major productions in Netflix's history. Critics took particular issue with the film's narrative approach, its heavy reliance on recognizable science fiction and fantasy tropes, and its structural similarities to earlier cinematic works, say particularly Star Wars and Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, the latter being a film the story overtly draws upon in its warrior recruitment narrative arc. At the same time, certain elements of the film, notably its visual craftsmanship, the performances of select cast members, the action sequences, and the music, were acknowledged even by negative reviewers as genuine achievements. On Rotten Tomatoes, the leading review aggregation website, the film achieved a critical approval rating of just 22% based on 182 critics' reviews, with an average rating of 4.2 out of 10. The website's consensus statement captured the critical mood with precision. Rebel Moon, Part 1 A Child of Fire proves Zack Snyder hasn't lost his visual flair, but eye candy isn't enough to offset a storyline made up of various sci-fi/fantasy tropes. This formulation, acknowledging Snyder's visual gifts while dismissing the film's narrative substance, was representative of the most common critical position taken on the film. On Metacritic, which uses a weighted average of critic scores to generate a single numerical rating, Rebel Moon received a score of 31 out of 100 based on 40 critics' reviews, placing it in the generally unfavorable category, the publication's second lowest tier of critical assessment. Among the more prominent negative reviews, Clarice Lowry of The Independent awarded the film just 1 star out of 5. Her review characterized the film as a collection of Snyder's worst directorial impulses, a chaotic assembly of imagery, some of it designed to shock, organized largely around considerations of what might look impressive in a promotional trailer rather than what might work within the coherent logic of a narrative. This critique of the film as essentially trailer bait, a series of striking individual moments that failed to cohere into a satisfying cinematic experience, was echoed by several other critics. The Guardian's Charles Bramesco also awarded the film 1 star out of 5. Characterizing it as a project whose ambitions had been fatally diminished by a pervasive half-heartedness. His review noted that the finished product possessed only the vaguest outlines of genuine cinematic ambition, undermined by what he described as a diminishing small-mindedness that reduced yet another CGI-saturated universe-scale saga to something forgettable and inconsequential. Simon Abrams, reviewing for RogerRabbit.com, gave the film 1 star out of 4 and focused his critique on the film's derivative nature and its failure to transcend its evident influences. He characterized Rebel Moon as too closely resembling both Star Wars and Seven Samurai, arguing that the film's over-reliance on visual spectacle came at the expense of genuinely original characters and themes. The sense that Rebel Moon was a sophisticated exercise in genre pastiche without an animating original vision was central to many of the negative assessments. Robbie Cullen of the Daily Telegraph was somewhat more generous, awarding the film 2 stars out of 5, but his review was hardly enthusiastic. He highlighted the film's obvious debts to Star Wars, describing the first half of Snyder's 2-part project as functioning more as a loosely sketched mood board than as a fully realized functioning film, a succession of pulpy images and concepts that sounded appealing in isolation but became numbing when placed side by side in narrative sequence. Jordan Hoffman, writing for The Messenger, gave the film a score of 4 out of 10. His review was notable for its comparative framing. He argued that as a space opera, Rebel Moon lacked the philosophical weight of Denis Villeneuve's Dune adaptation, the character richness of Guardians of the Galaxy, the deranged creative energy of Jupiter Ascending or The Fifth Element, and the kinetic fun of Star Wars. In positioning the film as inferior to its most obvious points of comparison across multiple dimensions, Hoffman's review made a case that Rebel Moon occupied an unfortunate middle ground, not serious enough to satisfy viewers seeking weighty science fiction, not fun enough to satisfy those seeking pure entertainment. Lauren Coates of the AV Club delivered one of the most harshly worded assessments, awarding the film a grade of D-. Her review described Rebel Moon as a limp, soulless regurgitation of tropes borrowed from far more accomplished films, arguing that despite Snyder's evident efforts to create a dark and gripping universe, the result was a fundamentally hollow experience. The grade of D- placed the film near the bottom of the publication's assessment scale, a rare distinction that reflected the depth of Coates's disappointment. Owen Gleiberman of Variety took a somewhat more nuanced position, describing the film as eminently watchable while ultimately characterizing it as a project constructed so entirely from borrowed parts that its appeal would likely be limited to dedicated Snyder devotees. His review acknowledged the craft involved in the production while questioning whether Rebel Moon had anything genuinely new to offer the science fiction genre. Among the more positive critical voices, Fred Topel of United Press International offered an assessment that was considerably warmer than the critical consensus. Topel described the film as an entertaining filtration of science fiction and storytelling conventions through Snyder's distinctive directorial lens, praising the way the director's personal sensibilities shaped familiar material into something that felt distinctive even when it was drawing openly on established templates. Daniel Egan of the South China Morning Post awarded the film 3.5 out of 5 stars and focused his praise on Snyder's world-building vision and his muscular filmmaking style. Egan argued that Snyder brought to the project the sensational capacity for creating immersive visual environments, a quality he described as capable of overwhelming viewers with sheer cinematic force. This emphasis on Snyder's ability to create physical and visual impact, even in the absence of sophisticated narrative, was characteristic of the more sympathetic critical readings. Adam Graham of the Detroit News gave the film a grade of B-, one of the more positive assessments from a major publication. Graham's review acknowledged the film's obviously derivative nature while arguing that it borrowed from a sufficiently solid set of sources to remain genuinely watchable. His observation that the film's referential quality helped maintain a brisk pace, giving audiences the comfort of familiar story beats even as the specific world of Rebel Moon was being introduced, reflected a willingness to evaluate the film on its own modest terms rather than holding it to higher standards. The critical reception of the director's cut, released as Rebel Moon Chapter 1, Chalice of Blood in August 2024, was modestly more favorable than that of the theatrical cut. On Rotten Tomatoes, 53% of critics responded positively to the extended version, a significant improvement over the 22% approval rating of the theatrical release, though still a far cry from majority critical endorsement. This improvement suggested that the director's cut's additional runtime and more explicit content helped address some of the criticisms leveled at the theatrical version, particularly those concerning underdeveloped characters and an overly rushed narrative pace. Chase Hutchinson of Collider reviewed the director's cut and found it wanting, arguing that the extended version somehow managed to be worse than the theatrical cut despite or perhaps because of its additional length. Hutchinson's review contended that the extra material failed to add the depth or well-constructed action sequences that critics had identified as missing from the shorter version, ultimately concluding that Chalice of Blood offered nothing worth revisiting despite its additional nearly 2 hours of content. Zashaw Millman of Polygon offered a contrasting perspective, arguing that Chalice of Blood represented a genuine improvement over A Child of Fire. In Millman's assessment, the director's cut concluded with the stronger promise for future installments in the series than the theatrical version's equivalent ending delivered, and the extended runtime and various side quests of the longer version never felt like overreach. This reading positioned the director's cut as a more confident and fully realized version of Snyder's vision, even if the theatrical cut had its own merits. Perhaps the most effusive praise for the director's cuts came from David James of We Got This Covered, who reviewed both Part 1 and Part 2's director's cuts together. James awarded both films 4 out of 5 stars and described Rebel Moon as a potential cult classic in the making, a kinky, gory, and genuinely bizarre science fiction epic that represented something remarkable in the contemporary streaming landscape, where algorithm-driven content had become the norm. James's praise encompassed the sex scenes, the violence, and the performances, though he specifically noted the musical score as a weaker element. His framing of the director's cuts as cult cinema in the making rather than failed mainstream entertainment offered a different way of understanding what Rebel Moon might eventually mean to its audience over time. The divergence between the critical response to the theatrical cut and the director's cut raised interesting questions about how Rebel Moon should ultimately be evaluated. If the 70-minute longer version was meaningfully better received by critics, what did that say about the decision to present the shorter theatrical cut as the film's primary public face? Some critics and commentators argued that Netflix's commercial pressures and the desire for a more broadly accessible, faster-paced product had resulted in the wider release of a less fully realized version of Snyder's vision. Others maintained that no amount of additional footage could compensate for what they saw as fundamental structural and narrative weaknesses in the underlying story. The relationships between the critical response and the film's viewership numbers was itself a subject of some discussion in the entertainment press. Rebel Moon's 72.9 million cumulative views in its first month on Netflix, a respectable if not exceptional suggested that a substantial audience had engaged with the film regardless of what critics said. This disconnect between critical opinion and audience behavior was not unusual in the streaming era, where access is free for subscribers and the cost of watching a poorly reviewed film is therefore low. But it was particularly notable given the depth of the critical disapproval Rebel Moon attracted. The film's reception also prompted broader conversations about Zack Snyder's place in contemporary cinema. For his supporters, a dedicated and vocal fan community that had championed the Snyder cut of Justice League and that viewed his departure from the DC Extended Universe as a significant loss. Rebel Moon was further evidence of a singular directorial vision being misunderstood and undervalued by critics who could not appreciate what he was attempting. For his detractors, the film confirmed long-standing criticisms that Snyder's technical virtuosity and visual intelligence were not matched by equivalent narrative sophistication or character development, resulting in spectacular but ultimately hollow cinema. The critical consensus say that Rebel Moon's visuals were impressive but its story was derivative and underdeveloped. They placed the film in a lineage of Snyder productions that had generated similar assessments. Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice and the theatrical cut of Justice League had both been criticized in comparable terms. And even Man of Steel, perhaps his most critically divided superhero film, had faced versions of the same critique. Rebel Moon was in this sense both a continuation of a familiar pattern and a test case for whether that pattern would persist in a non-superhero franchise context. What remains clear from the totality of the critical response is that Rebel Moon occupied a genuinely contested position in the landscape of contemporary science fiction cinema. It was neither an unqualified creative success nor the kind of monumental failure that generates its own form of notoriety. It was, in the end, exactly what many had predicted it might be: a visually stunning, narratively derivative, intermittently compelling science fiction spectacle that gave its many admirers the Snyder experience they sought while leaving its critics largely unmoved by the substance beneath the style. For all the critical discourse surrounding Rebel Moon, the film ultimately found its audience, millions of Netflix subscribers who spent their holiday evenings in the fictional galaxy of the Motherworld, following Kora and her assembled warriors toward a confrontation with the Imperium. Whether that audience will grow larger over time, whether the director's cuts will become the definitive versions through which the film is eventually remembered, and whether Rebel Moon will ultimately succeed in its ambition to become the cornerstone of a major franchise, those are questions that the years following the film's release have only begun to answer. What is certain is that Rebel Moon arrived as one of the more ambitious and contentious Netflix originals of its era, and that it left behind a legacy of creative ambition, critical controversy, and genuine, if complicated, cultural impact. When a peaceful settlement on a moon in the furthest reaches of the universe finds itself threatened by the armies of the tyrannical regent Balisorius, a mysterious stranger named Kora becomes their best hope for survival. From Zack Snyder, the filmmaker behind 300, Man of Steel, and Army of the Dead, comes Rebel Moon, an epic science fantasy event decades in the making. When a peaceful settlement on a moon in the furthest reaches of the universe finds itself threatened by the armies of the tyrannical regent Balisorius, Kora, Sophia Botella, a mysterious stranger living among the villagers, becomes their best hope for survival. Tasked with finding trained fighters who will unite with her in making an impossible stand against the Motherworld, Kora assembles a small band of warriors, outsiders, insurgents, peasants and orphans of war from different worlds who share a common need for redemption and revenge. As the shadow of an entire realm bears down on the unlikeliest of moons, a new army of heroes is formed. Novelized by V. Castro, two-time Bram Stoker Award-nominated author. Experience Rebel Moon on the page in this pulse-pounding novelization. Review. The Motherworld has ruled this far-off galaxy with an iron fist. Over thousands of years, the monarchs have conquered and waged war, creating a great, but brutal empire. The current king, Kora, hopes that his daughter, Issa, Stella Grace Fitzgerald, who has the power of healing and resurrection, will unite the galaxy through compassion and love, instead of war. On Issa's coronation day, the entire royal family is assassinated, severing the bloodline and creating chaos. In the ensuing confusion, Senator Belisarius, Francis Fee, declares himself regent and returns to the warlike ways of the past. And this is where the story begins. I know a broken bar all that, and we haven't even gotten to the actual plot of the movie. Kora, Sophia Boutella, Belisarius' adopted daughter, Imperium warrior, and former bodyguard to Issa, is now living in the farming community on the moon known as Veld. When Admiral Atticus Noble arrives and threatens her new home, she and gunner, Michiel Halsman, venture out with Kai, Charlie Hunnam, a mercenary pilot hired by Kora, to gather together a band of warriors to fight against Noble and the Motherworld. Their team consists of Tarak, Stas Nair, a nobleman with the ability to bond with animals, Nemesis, Duunabai, a cyborg with laser-like swords which she expertly wields with Grace Titus, Jimin Hansu, a Imperium general, who turned against the Motherworld, and Darian Bloodox, the leader of the rebel army fighting against Noble as his men. The majority of the film is Kora and Gunner traveling to different worlds and gathering together the team. It is revealed that Kora is the most wanted fugitive in the galaxy, and in the end, one of her team betrays her, leading to a final showdown between her and Noble. Who lives? Who dies? Who cares? Watch and find out. The story was formulated by director Zack Snyder and was originally pitched to the Walt Disney Company shortly after they acquired the rights to Star Wars as a more mature take on the Star Wars universe. Later he pitched the idea to Warner Brothers Pictures, multiple times, as both a video game and a film, but eventually it was redeveloped with producer Eric Newman, first as a television series but eventually landing on a film for Netflix. The film is a combination of the works of Akira Kurosawa, heavy metal and the aforementioned Star Wars franchise, and you can see elements of all these in the finished product. Rebel Moon, Part 1. A Child of Fire had a limited theatrical release on December 15, 2023 and went to streaming on Netflix on December 21 of that same year. The film is rated PG-13, but there are plans for an R-rated director's cut to be released before Part 2 and the Scargiver is released in April of 2024. In seeing the previews for this movie, I thought it looked pretty good and was excited to see it. This is one situation where I was really let down. Snyder is a master at creating visually stunning films with great action sequences, and this movie has all that, although I feel he overused the slow-motion effects usually reserved to emphasize elements of the fight, often being used with little to no reason. The costumes are a bit strange, and I feel were influenced by the Kurosawa films. I liked how they looked but have heard from others that they were a bit too earthy looking and not otherworldly enough. The film is sorely lacking in a cohesive storyline and relatable characters, and the plot felt hodgepodge and thrown together, especially for a movie that has been in development for a very long time. The scattered scenes feel like sci-fi tropes stitched together, but with only a very fine thread holding them in place. We aren't given enough history or time with any one character to really form a connection, to the point that when one of the team is killed, I felt absolutely nothing, as I had not been given enough time with that character to form that bond. Although the scene is filmed in such a way that you can tell they wanted you to feel something, the dialogue, although beautiful and poetic, felt forced and without the ring of truth to it, more like someone reading from a novel than characters actually conversing. The only character I really cared about is hardly in this film, and that is Jimmy, voiced wonderfully by Anthony Hopkins, a mechanical knight who was loyal to the royal family and in the beginning helps Kora defeat the soldiers left on Velt who are attempting to rape a young girl. Jimmy later runs away and at the end, we see him on Velt in a field wearing the crown of flowers given to him earlier and a set of antlers. Great visual, but with no explanation. With all this, the film is entertaining and watchable, but I was just expecting something a bit more cohesive. I think it could have made a much better series, allowing the audience time to get to know and connect with the characters. A review is just one person's opinion, so if you are a Zack Snyder fan and you love this film, that is awesome. No one and no review should ever make you feel bad for liking something. This is just how I felt watching this film. Director Zack Snyder revealed months ago that there will be 2 cuts of the movies in his upcoming 2-part sci-fi epic, Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, which will be released through the Netflix streaming service on December 22nd, and Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, which will reach Netflix on April 19, 2024. One cut will be something anyone can enjoy and watch, while the director's cut will be a more explicit version that will allow fans to take a deeper, harder dive into the material. He has even said that the director's cut of Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire has close to an hour of extra content, a broken bar, and now Netflix's Tudum site has posted the runtime for the regular cut of the film. It's 2 hours and 13 minutes, so it looks like the director's cut will boost it up to around the 3-hour mark. Snyder has always been open about the fact that he's hoping a massive IP and a universe that can be built out from the foundation of Rebel Moon. He crafted the story for Rebel Moon with 300 co-writer Kurt Johnstad, and the pair wrote the screenplay with Army of the Dead co-writer Shay Hatton. The events of the 2 films, which draw inspiration from Seven Samurai, are set in motion when a peaceful colony on the edge of the galaxy is threatened by the armies of a tyrannical regent named Balisorius. Desperate, the colonists dispatch a young woman with a mysterious past to seek out warriors from neighboring planets to help them make a stand. The film stars Sofia Boutella, The Mummy, Charlie Hunnam, Sons of Anarchy, Juman Hansu, A Quiet Place Part 2, Ray Fisher, Justice League, Duna Bai, The Host, Gina Malone, Sucker Punch, Stas Nair, Supergirl, E. Duffy, whose previous credits are all short films, Charlotte Maggi, Mavericks, Sky Yang, Tomb Raider, Michiel Huisman, Game of Thrones, Alfonso Herrera, Ozark, Carrie Elves, Saw, Corey Stoll, Ant-Man, Ed Skrein, Deadpool, Anthony Hopkins, Hannibal, and Stuart Martin. Army of Thieves. Snyder, his wife Deborah Snyder, and Wesley Collar are producing the Rebel Moon films through their company Stone Quarry. Eric Newman is producing via his banner, Grand Electric, while Grand Electric's Sir Bowen executive produces. What do you think of the runtime for Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire? Will you be watching both cuts of these movies, or will you be sticking to either the regular cuts or the director's cuts? Share your thoughts on this one by leaving a comment below. There's something insidious about a bad movie that has a lot of bonkers stuff in it. In the words of Admiral Akbar, who is not in this Star Wars ripoff, it's a trap. Because you'll hear about all the odd baubles of Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon, Part 1, A Child of Fire. And no matter how much I warn you that they are thrown together in a dull and frustrating way, you won't believe me. Gina Malone as a vengeance-seeking Spider-Woman, Charlie Hunnam as a hipster douchebag space pirate, a burly prince who hates shirts so much you might assume his parents were murdered by them, a robot named Jimmy who is voiced by Anthony Hopkins, a ripped villain who loves Nazi aesthetics and tentacle porn with equal measure. What's not to love? I hear you wondering. So much. Truly, Netflix's latest ploy at big-budget genre thrills is nowhere near as fun or daring as bad but good movies like Winter's Tale, Jupiter Ascending, or even Cats. Worst of all, it's boring. Zack Snyder's Star Wars is a bore. Originally pitched to Lucasfilm as a Star Wars movie and understandably rejected, Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon trods very familiar terrain, beginning with the humble but hot farmer who, despite their reluctance, is destined to be a major figure in the rebellion against a fascist interplanetary regime. While the names and lingo have been changed to avoid lawsuits, this movie still feels so close to George Lucas's copyrighted universe that Snyder is practically daring Disney's legal team to sue. Rather than an opening crawl, Rebel Moon lays out its exposition dump in long voice-over from Jimmy Hopkins, who explains that an evil empire is gobbling up the resources of unsuspecting planets while smacking down rebels that work to stop them. Then, Snyder plops us down on a vulnerable world of dirt farmers, where a stern-browed Kora, Sophia Botella, warns her neighbors not to trust the soldiers whose massive ship has begun ominously hovering above their fields. Sound familiar? Deadpool villain Ed Skrein comes on the scene as Admiral Atticus Noble, and from his SS-like military gear to his menacingly sharp smile, he is clearly anything but. His army of invading baddies predictably bring violence, but because this is Snyder's version of Star Wars, they also bring a very clear threat of rape. There's a crass and tedious sequence where every soldier but one giddily gears up to sexually assault a local girl, Charlotte Maggie, who might have a name but is chiefly defined by being beautiful while carrying water. Thankfully, Kora and some unlikely allies stop this assault through battle. However, to defeat the reinforcements sure to come, the peaceful villagers need to bring warriors to their defense. So, Kora and Gunner, Michiel Huisman, one of the hot farmers who has a crush on her, set out to round up a crew. That process makes up most of the movie, roping in familiar figures like a disgraced general called Titus, a criminally underused Jimin Hansu, disillusioned samurai nemesis, Unabai, the imposing but actually noble revolutionary Darian Bloodox, Ray Fisher, the aforementioned shirtless prince called Tarak, Stas Nair, and Kai, Charlie Hunnam, a space pirate who's like if Han Solo came from Girls' version of Brooklyn. It's not just the archetypes of its heroes and villains that borrow hard from Star Wars. It's also the requisite cantina scene with quirky alien critters, the vaguely Western plotline with sci-fi flair, the gentlemanly droids, which won't be called droids, and the lightsabers that might be generously relabeled as laser cutlasses. From there, Snyder just heaps in other influences, ranging from the Spear vs. Spaceship play of Avatar to the names and legend of Kora to the fashion of Vampire Hunter D and the psychosexual tube play of 1984's Dune. And while the too muchness of all that might have made for an exciting and rich pastiche, there's so little connective tissue between these things that Snyder's vision instead feels like a lazy collage, stealing from richer, original genre works. Snyder hits all his pitfalls with Rebel Moon. While the influences are as varied as the settings in this universe-stretching war drama, all of it is painted with Snyder's signature color scheme: grim grays and greens coat empty fields, a bustling port city, spaceships, and palaces. Accents of orange and red come in sweeps of violence, from explosions to the swath of a red lightsaber race or a laser cutlass. This color scheme flattens these worlds, as does Snyder's grating reliance on CGI backdrops that feel false, even when Snyder's cinematography is otherwise picturesque. Remember when Annie Leibovitz shot those rapturously elegant cover photos of the Star Wars cast for Vanity Fair? Those seem to be a major influence for Rebel Moon, not only in how Snyder stages his wide shots, with the seriousness and beauty befitting a perfume ad, but also in how he casts his heroes. From 300 and Sucker Punch to Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, Snyder not only favors his cool color palette but also a cast that looks ripped from Runaways and the pages of fashion magazines. Yes, this makes for a very pretty picture, sometimes even an awe-inspiring one. But in Rebel Moon, this is arguably more jarring than usual. Where Star Wars movies are certainly full of beautiful people, there are also plenty of characters who feel fairly ordinary, which helps ground a universe full of humans and every kind of alien, from Sultry to Sarlacc to Jabba the Hutt. However, in Rebel Moon, the characters are either gorgeous or grotesque. So, when Kora scans the cantina, Hunnam's meticulously groomed thief is a sharp contrast to a handsy alien who appears to be made entirely of boils. Props to the actor under the prosthetics say he was a hoot. This disparity becomes downright comical, as even a character literally introduced covered in mud and shit will get a glamorous makeover between scenes. It's a Snyder movie. No one can go into battle without being ripped and polished. Maybe if Snyder's work showed some self-awareness of this grim glossy aesthetic, it might work. But true to form, Moon Rebel is doggedly stern in its tone, forcing its heroes into the constraints of brooding and battle-crying while gorgeous. It's the same suffocating constraint Disney put on its 2000s princesses, limiting their facial expressions in the name of pretty. And all that makes for a film that, despite a barrage of influences, settings, and action sequences, feels flat and emotionally hollow. Rebel Moon is at its best when Snyder goes beyond brooding. Thankfully, not every character in this space odyssey falls into the prim framing of stunning while so serious. Pacific Rim's Charlie Hunnam is a deranged delight as Kai, who although undeniably a smoke show piles on an Irish accent with a slew of red flag accessories, including a man bun, a Darren Aronofsky-worthy scarf, silver chain, and what appear to be denim joggers. From the moment he sidles up to Kora at the cantina, he oozes with fuckboy charm. That energy feels chaotic in Snyder's somber setting, which makes every moment Hunnam has on-screen exciting. Where much of the movie is predictable, his sparking charisma brings fun and spontaneity. But like many of the most intriguing characters in Rebel Moon, his role is too brief. Elsewhere, Corey Stoll is jolly as a fatherly village leader. Anthony Hopkins is absurd yet amusing as a cerebral battlebot. Cloud Atlas's Doona Bai is superb as Nemesis, a dual-fisted swordsperson who lands the film's best scene opposite the Hunger Games' Gina Malone. While Bai follows the Snyder aesthetic of facial stoniness, her eyes carry remorse as she enters a fight where no one really wins. Meanwhile, Malone is near unrecognizable as a spider-human hybrid, made believable through superb special effects. Yet from behind all of these disturbing visual enhancements, Malone delivers a gutting performance that speaks volumes, with spitted deliveries and a snarl. This sequence, set midway through the building the crew stage of the film, was so rich in its storytelling, from setting up the conflict on a mining planet to establishing the moral code of Nemesis, that I began to have hope Rebel Moon might pull out of its tedious tailspin. Sadly, it did not. Instead, the movie lumbers on from one introduction of a warrior to another, bouncing sporadically back to Skane's villain, who was either relaxing with tubes and tentacles or switching to a boring shirt and tie for the film's anticlimactic showdown. The world building is done in fits of heavy exposition. And sure, you know this story won't be complete because part 1 is in the title, but you won't believe how incomplete it is. We're not talking Fast X or Spider-Man, Across the Spider-Verse, where plenty of story, character building, and stakes are set up to thrill us before teasing an even bigger final battle in the future movie. Instead, the team gets built, has one skirmish, and then the movie is over, with a confounding leap of logic from its surviving heroes. Snyder piles on some flashy while flummoxing imagery and last-minute exposition to set up his part 2. But after this movie spends 2 hours and 15 minutes poorly establishing its characters while ripping off Star Wars more than making its own space, it's really near impossible to care. Christy Puchko is the entertainment editor at Mashable, based in New York City. She's an established film critic and entertainment reporter who has traveled the world on assignment, covered a variety of film festivals, co-hosted movie-focused podcasts, and interviewed a wide array of performers and filmmakers. Zack Snyder seems to have fully embraced the Netflix model. After dealing with nothing but WB drama regarding the release of Justice League, the filmmaker has found a creative partnership with Netflix which allows him to create just about anything he wants. A zombie war movie? Here's Army of the Dead, a spin-off of said zombie movie. Have Army of Thieves. Now, it appears Netflix is ready to release Snyder's Star Wars idea that got pushed to the wayside years ago, titled Rebel Moon. Now, split into 2 parts, Rebel Moon A Part 1, A Child of Fire is set to arrive next month. The first film in the 2-part epic is said to be about a young woman who pulls together a gang of misfit warriors as they try to defend their home planet from the horrible Empire. Snyder has wrangled actors such as Sophia Boutella, Charlie Hunnam, Ray Fisher, Jimin Hansu, Doona Bai, Stas Nair, Alfonso Herrera, Gina Malone, Stuart Martin, Ed Skrein, Cary Elwes, and Corey Stoll joined the cast of what is surely going to be another blockbuster for the filmmaker. After the massive success of Army of the Dead, it's clear that Netflix is willing to give a blank check to Zack Snyder, until his rabid fanbase doesn't show up. And judging by the fact that #restore the Snyderverse still trends fairly regularly, you know the Snyder faithful are ready to support Rebel Moon with their full might. Rebel Moon A Part 1, A Child of Fire is set to arrive on Netflix on December 22nd. You can see the trailer for the film below. The director's attempt to replicate Star Wars for smartphones is an ugly, unforgivably dull and self-serious mess. Zack Snyder pitched Rebel Moon as a marriage of Seven Samurai and Star Wars, which is a bit like trying to sell your new invention as the wheel meets sliced bread. The former channeled all of Akira Kurosawa's estimable powers in blocking, lighting and composition for battles that still merit the nearly exhausted descriptor of epic. The latter was a once-in-a-millennium big bang of raw movie stardom, snappy dialogue and transportive production design that turned a mid-budget space oddity into a culture-straddling phenomenon. Both are fundamentally impossible to replicate. And so Lucasfilm passed on Snyder's tall order, as did Warner Brothers, more than once, until the good people at Netflix uncinched the readily loosened purse strings for what had gradually become the blockbuster king's longest simmering passion project. Yet the finished product has only the vaguest contours of ambition, diminished by a half-assedness stinkifying the latest CGI-jammed saga to decide the fate of the universe. If it can be considered complete at all, that is, as this 134-minute film really only covers the getting the gang together phase that most movies in the genre knock out within the first half hour, a fragment of story to be wrapped up with the second installment next year. One hopes that Snyder has saved the good stuff for his climactic conclusion, and not just the grand clashes conspicuously absent from an adventure that fits and belongs on a laptop. Longtime Snyder heads may happen upon the epiphany that his trademark slow-mo action tableaus look like screensavers more than anything else. There's still time for him to add character development to his ragtag band of cardboard cutouts, a tactility to his nondescript green screen locations, a deeper sense of meaning to the stultifyingly generic plot, and everything else that leaves a sort of polished nothingness in its lack. But by the end credits, expecting anyone to come back and find out feels like asking a lot. In film school, some professors use the familiar example of Star Wars to teach Campbellian mythmaking, the theories that identify and codify the narrative units recontextualized since Grecian times. Snyder demonstrates a clear fluency in these concepts with his classically minded scripting, except he forgot the part where the archetypes are meant to be refreshed through novel contexts. On the humble farming planet of wherever in the galaxy of who cares, the broad outline of a hero, Sophia Botella, terse and humorless and physically perfect, just how Snyder likes M, must defend her village from a faraway notion of an evil empire. They rose to power in some great cataclysm of yore during which our hero's family was killed, and the final boss took her in to teach her the combat skill she'd one day use to take her revenge. Snyder mistakes exposition for world building, the lugubriously delivered dreams of backstory removing the audience from the fantasy rather than immersing them in it. To topple the mini-boss, Ed Skrein, his British accent and high cheekbones marking him as a baddie, come to appropriate her people's grain. She and her sidekick, a neutered Michiel Huisman, bop around the cosmos rounding up sympathizers to their cause, including a self-interested yet caddishly likable mercenary we'll call not Han Solo, Charlie Hunnam, more visibly awake than most of his scene partners. They are most easily referred to by their function both because they exist as little more than sketches, and because the muddy sound mix isn't doing viewers any favors, but especially because their names are often long and difficult to retain. Others are catchier, but never for good reasons. General Titus, Jimin Hansu, and the squid-faced King Levitica offer arbitrary illusions for which the writing never makes any attempt to account. Some are just silly, like the brother-sister warrior's surname in Blood Axe, or Skrein's effete colonist answering to Atticus Noble. The Oxford definition of the word derivative is, typically of an artist or work of art, imitative of the work of another person, and usually disapproved of for that reason. The word out here in these streets is that Rebel Moon, Zack Snyder's latest, is derivative, and therefore should be dismissed out of hand. Personally, I don't like to hear that word being used to describe a work because to me anyway, derivative and the judgment that comes from it is mostly relative. Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars are pretty universally loved and hailed as the templates for action movies from the 80s onward. But a huge fan of 1939 Stagecoach might have scoffed and discussed as Indiana Jones sliding underneath a moving truck just as an assailant did in that film, or anyone who'd read Dune, or Lord of the Rings, or John Carter of Mars prior to sitting in a theater in 1977 to watch Star Wars might have felt. My thought is, really at this point there is rarely anything new under the storytelling sun. Even a movie such as The Matrix, which is original in terms of its telling of a world that is a tech-based simulation, only exists in the form it is because of technological discoveries and realities in the real world. But it is mostly just a retelling of a world where in the past our protagonist realized they were stuck in a world of fantasy or dream, like The Wizard of Oz or Plato's allegory of the cave or like Tibetan Book of the Dead. Marking one of Netflix's biggest and most spectacular productions to date. This holiday season will see sci-fi fans of all stripes taken for an epic journey into the stars courtesy of the first installment in the groundbreaking Rebel Moon saga. With heart-racing action sequences, breathtaking visuals and cutting-edge special effects, Netflix and visionary filmmaker Zack Snyder are set to deliver a revolutionary new addition to one of the most beloved cinematic genres to grace viewers' screens. When Kora, Sophia Boutella, a young soldier with a mysterious past, seeks atonement among the peaceful colonists on the agricultural planet of Velt, she soon finds that there is no escaping the brutal and oppressive grip of the Imperium. Trading a life of death and destruction for the idyllic fields and annual harvests on a backwater moon on the very edge of the galaxy, Boutella's young heroine is faced with the prospect of seeing her adopted homeworld suffer the same fate she once helped deliver onto countless others. However, with the threat of Imperium's might hanging over the heads of Velt's ill-prepared and largely peaceful populace, Kora sets out on a dangerous quest to recruit a ragtag group of rebels from across the galaxy to help liberate her new homeland. What follows is but the first step in an epic new tale delivered on scale unlike anything Netflix has ever attempted previously. With sword-wielding cyborgs, valiant robots, hardened mercenaries and malevolent despots, this new space epic will see a tale of mythic proportions unfold against an incredible and intricately detailed sci-fi backdrop, featuring an all-star cast drawing talent from all four corners of the globe. Boutella's Kora is joined by the likes of Charlie Hunnam, Ed Skrein, Jimin Hounsou, Francis Fee, Ray Fisher, and even cinematic legend Sir Anthony Hopkins as the voice of Jimmy, the sole surviving member of a race of robotic knights who once served under the galaxy's fallen king. In a faraway galaxy ruled by a powerful and cruel empire known as the Motherworld, fear spreads across countless planets. This empire is built on war, control, and destruction. It does not care about peace or innocent lives. Everything changes when the royal family of the Motherworld is suddenly assassinated, including Princess Issa, who was believed to be the only hope for peace. After her death, a ruthless man named Belisarius takes control and declares himself the ruler. Instead of ending the violence, he makes it even worse, continuing the Empire's brutal conquest across the galaxy. Years later, on a quiet farming moon called Velt, life is simple and peaceful. The villagers live off the land, growing crops and staying away from trouble. Among them lives a mysterious woman named Kora. She keeps to herself, rarely speaking about her past. People know she is different, but no one truly understands who she really is. A kind farmer named Gunnar trusts her more than others. He sees that behind her silence, there is pain and strength. One day, everything changes. A massive imperial ship arrives in the sky, casting a dark shadow over the village. From it comes Admiral Atticus Noble, a cruel and heartless commander of the Motherworld. He is not there to help. He is hunting rebels and demands that the villagers give him all their extra grain. The village leader refuses, saying they barely have enough to survive. But Noble shows no mercy. Without hesitation, he kills the leader in front of everyone and gives the villagers 10 weeks to prepare the grain. If they fail, they will all die. Fear spreads through the village. Everyone knows they cannot meet this demand. Giving away their grain means starvation. Refusing means death. They are trapped. That night, the situation becomes even worse. Some Imperial soldiers try to harm a young girl named Sam. The village is helpless, too afraid to fight back. But in that moment, Kora steps forward. Suddenly, she is no longer just a quiet farmer. She moves like a trained warrior, fast and deadly. In seconds, she kills the soldiers and saves Sam. The villagers are shocked. They now realize Kora is hiding something powerful. Kora knows this is only the beginning. She warns everyone that Noble will return, and when he does, he will destroy the entire village. The only way to survive is to fight back, but they cannot do it alone. They need warriors. So Kora and Gunnar leave their home behind and begin a dangerous journey across the galaxy. During their journey, Kora finally reveals the truth about her past. She was once a soldier of the Motherworld. As a child, her planet was destroyed by the Empire. Belisarius himself took her in and raised her as his own weapon. He gave her a new name and trained her to become one of the deadliest fighters in the Empire. She was even chosen to protect Princess Issa. But after witnessing the truth of the Empire's cruelty, she lost faith and ran away. Now, she wants to make things right. Their journey takes them to a distant city where they meet a smuggler named Kai. He agrees to help them find warriors, but there is something about him that feels untrustworthy. Still, they have no other choice. Together, they begin gathering fighters. First, they find Tarak, a strong and brave man who was living as a slave. He proves his courage by taming a powerful flying creature and joins their cause. Then they meet Nemesis, a silent and deadly swordswoman who lost her children to the Empire. Her life is now driven by revenge, and she agrees to fight. Next, they find General Titus, a once great leader who has fallen into shame and lost his purpose. At first, he refuses to help, drowning himself in regret. But Kora reminds him of the man he used to be, and slowly, he agrees to join them, hoping to find redemption. Their team continues to grow stronger. Eventually, they meet Darian Bloodox, a rebel leader fighting against the Motherworld. He agrees to help defend the village, bringing his fighters with him. However, his sister Delver believes the mission is hopeless and refuses to join. She knows the power of the Empire and fears that this fight cannot be won. As they travel, the threat of the Empire grows closer. Admiral Noble continues his hunt, destroying entire worlds just to prove his power. Fear follows him everywhere. Then comes the biggest betrayal. Kai, the smuggler they trusted, reveals his true intentions. For money and reward, he betrays the entire group and hands them over to Noble. It feels like everything is lost. The warriors are captured, and hope begins to fade. But Gunnar refuses to give up. In a moment of courage, he frees Kora instead of helping Kai. This sparks a massive fight. One by one, the warriors break free and fight back against the Imperial forces. The battle is intense and chaotic. During the fight, Darian Bloodox is killed. His death is a heavy loss, reminding everyone of the cost of war. Finally, Kora faces Admiral Noble. The two clash in a powerful battle. Kora uses all her strength, skill, and anger. In the end, she defeats him, and it appears that Noble is dead. With the enemy gone, Kora and the surviving warriors return to Veld. The villagers see them not just as outsiders, but as heroes. For the first time, there is hope. They begin preparing to defend their home, knowing that the real battle is still coming. But far away, the story is not over. Noble's body is recovered by the Empire. Using advanced technology, they bring him back to life. He is not finished. Belisarius gives him a new mission to return, crush the rebellion, and capture Kora alive. The danger is far from over. Back on Veld, the villagers train and prepare for war. They are no longer helpless farmers. With Kora leading them and warriors by their side, they are ready to fight for their survival. Each of them knows the risk, but they also know what they are protecting of their home, their people, and their future. In a galaxy filled with darkness, one small village chooses to stand against an unstoppable empire. And sometimes, Even the smallest spark of rebellion can grow into a fire strong enough to challenge the stars. Band drove to Chicago and Devin flew to Chicago so they could record an episode of the podcast about Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon. It was just that important, or they were getting together for a comic book convention and they took advantage of the time to record the podcast episode together. Either way, for the first time in years they were in the same room recording about sci-fi movies, and the movies were Rebel Moon Part 1 and 2, and they have a hot take. The hot take, well, that would be telling, but the reactions to both of these movies do not align with the vocal reactions on social media that they have seen. Find out what's new on Netflix for April 2026 and beyond. Netflix is showering you with incredible content, including new original movies and shows like Apex and So, Kitty. Season. Zack Snyder directs a new interpretation of Norse legend in Twilight of the Gods, and gets blood all over everything. Zack Snyder has built his brand on director's cuts. Are they enhancing his films, or just the sign of a filmmaker who can't stop brainstorming? Rebel Moon Part 2. Director's cut is too long. But don't you want to see Kora's warriors and the villagers fight it out with the space Nazis?